Liz, good news. If you change your Adobe ID, don't worry, your portfolio will remain completely intact. Just contact them and they will actually do the migration for you. If your subscription expires or you discontinue it, your portfolio will also remain intact because again, it's connected to your name. So I'm guessing that they just leave it on their servers tagged to your name until they don't hear from you for years or you decide you want to move it. But what I would do is contact them about this first, have them actually migrate this site because your Student Columbia site exists. You may never have signed in, but it exists.
Well, I just kind of sort of started to make my portfolio site and just have a couple of things up there. So
But there's no reason, no, and if you have any assets, you've done any work, they should just be able to move it over for you. So, and that's the other thing, I would call them and just check, because again, there's no reason to pay for it both. So that's what I would do. There's also been some question about, because there's a lot of people in here, I emailed and said, well, what's going to happen to the people in here who graduate in December? Do they still get their subscription until, how long do they keep your subscription? And they have not gotten back to me yet. So do me a favor, if that's something that applies to you and I have not answered that in like a couple of weeks, send me something again so that I can remind, so I will send it to them again and say, we're really looking for an answer for this. So that's basically that part. If we go to Photoshop really quickly, I just want to show everybody this. So this is just a letter A that I put on my screen to type. If I double click on it, it's a Minion Pro. This Minion Pro exists right here in the drop-down menu. So it's a letter A. And this is the type. If you click on the drop-down menu here, you will see that there's a whole series. These are all the typefaces that are loaded on my computer right now. You can actually go through these and they will give you previews of what's going on your screen. Let me move my A over just a little bit so you can see this a little bit better. So as you go through here, you can see that your A's, it gives you a live preview. You can change what all of these guys look like. That part's actually great. You can actually type in here. So let's say you can actually do a search by this. So if I'm going to search for a Franklin, and here's Franklin Book Gothic right here. So again, you can do all of those sorts of things. Again, I'm going to go back to Minion Pro. Do they have enough Minion Pros? Minion Pro, but the other thing that they've got in here is this Add Fonts from Adobe Typekit. If you click on this, this takes you to Adobe's entire foundry for type. And you can search for anything in here. So I'm just going to say okay to all of that. This is all their different types. And anytime that you find something in here you like, so let's say I've got this guy right here, it'll take me to this. It'll allow me to, again, this has got a whole series of fonts that are in here. I can activate these fonts and it will put them onto my computer and I will have them actually active and visible to me. So, and these tend to be, for those of you who've been only working with free, non-commercial typefaces, some of them are okay. None of them are really all that great. This stuff is all state-of-the-art. So at any rate, just realize that you have that part. And then finally, just trying to get through all the questions that came up at the beginning. So Liz, this is what I was talking about right here, about the difference in a vector and a rasterized font. So this is just a regular type. You know, again, I clicked on the type tool and it came over here. It was Minion Pro and I typed in an A. That's all it is. If I double click on it, you can see that this is in, my image size here, but my file is 13 by 19 inches. So this is an 800 point font. You can make it smaller, so I can crank it all the way down and I can crank it all the way back up again. You get where this is all going, right? So it's just a typical type in Photoshop. So that's what that guy looks like. It's I don't want 880, I want just 800 point font. So what this actually is, though, in real life, if you look behind the scenes, it's this. I'm going to select this guy again. And I'm going to change this type to actually, I'm going to create a work path. This is actually how the font is truly built. So I'll show you what this looks like. If you've never used paths before, you're going to get to them in retouching, so you'll see what it looks like. But this is what's really going on with the type tool, is it builds a path. This is a mathematical path that is describing this shape. So these points are defined. There's an equation that's being used to define this whole shape. Does that sort of make sense, what's going on? So if we go back to the font itself, I'm going to uncheck the path so I don't see that. If I do this font itself, I'm actually going to, again, double click on it, and I'm going to take it down to, say, 7 points. I'm going to make it a really small font. I take it back. Before I do that, hang on. Let me show you this really quick. So I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to make what I called a rasterized version of this guy. So to do that, I'm simply going to command click on this. I've loaded this now as a selection. I'm simply going to add a new layer, and in that new layer, I am going to fill it with black. And if you take a look at both of these, they look identical. I just turned the bottom one off, or I'm going to turn the top one off. They look identical. Does that sort of make sense? However, one of them is made up of pixels. So if we zoom in on this one, well, I'll show you what happens if we just change them. So I'm going to go, I don't know if it'll let me actually transform a type issue, but we'll try. Yeah, this actually will let me transform a type. I'll see if I can transform both of them at the same time. Yeah, it looks like I can transform both of these at the same time. So I'm going to crush this thing. I'm going to actually take it down to 2%. So I'm going to make it really super, super small. And now if we take a look at this, we've got really small little a's. That sounded so wrong. Does that make sense what's going on here? We good on this? Okay, then I'm going to enlarge it back up again. I'm going to retransform it back up again. So again, both of them are selected, Command T. In this case, I'm going to do the link between the two. And in this case now, I've got to do 50,000 to get it up to the same size that it was. Yeah, or 5,000, the same size that it was. And I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. And you can see what's happened to the rasterized font. Look at the edges of this. It's been destroyed because it was made up of pixels. It's made up of, there's a dot at every single one of those pixel sites. And when it got crushed down, it lost its definition. When it came back up, it didn't. However, the mathematical one that's underneath it keeps its entire shape no matter what you do to it. So you can make it bigger, smaller, bigger, smaller, smaller, bigger, bigger, all that kind of stuff, whatever, and it never changes it because this, again, it's a mathematical description of the edge of this. So no matter how small you make it or big you make it, the mathematical description never changes. Does that sort of make sense? So when we talk about rasterizing your logo, this is exactly what we're talking about. You would want the rasterized version of this. Okay, there are questions about this? All right. Back to this really quickly, guys, and then we are going to do some other stuff we're actually going to start working on your pictures, I hope. I know. Okay, so back to the physical portfolio. I'm just going to show you a couple of these really quickly. If you actually, the textbook that I had told you that's only suggested for this class, but it's not really a part of this class, this is actually a section from this, and this actually may have been in the part that you guys read. Did you read through the whole No Plastic Sleeves, chapter 1 and 2? Did you guys get through that part? Did it talk about this whole type of no, this is going to be in the next part of it. So you can actually find this book in the library. Unfortunately, we do not have an electronic version of this, but I want you to I'm going to throw out a couple of things for you to be thinking about. Again, I'm trying to get you to think about the portfolio that you want to build or that you want to have based on your brand. Are we okay about that? So if we take a look at this in the binding at the very beginning, I'm going to zoom in on this just a little bit. If you talk about different ways to actually bind a book, if you think about the way a book is, so again, Just imagine a portfolio or a regular book. One of the first options that you can have, and sort of like one of the simplest options you have, is where you actually do a book that's glued back to back. And what that means is, I need everybody to look up at me really quickly so I can show you what this means, is let's say this is one of your prints and it looks great, but on the back you have nothing, right? Because there's a lot of papers, most papers in fact, you can only print on a single side. You can't print on both sides. That's certainly true of most photographic. If you're doing silver printing, you can only get it on one side. So one of the easiest ways to get a back-to-back, if that's what you want to do, is you print this image, and let's say this is what you want to be on the back side of it. So you print these two as single images, and then you glue them back to back, and you build this now becomes your page. Does that sort of make sense? So the upside of that is that you only have to print on one side. The downside of that is you actually have to glue these things together, which is not impossible to do. Again, most people would do spray mount to do it, to actually bring these together so it doesn't end up being really wrinkly. But again, it's just stylistically how you're going to put this whole thing together. Aligning pages when you actually do that becomes really difficult. Again, not impossible, but it's hard if you're going to contact submit these together. If you don't touch down the first edge perfectly, then when you go to the next one, you get this. So the way people avoid that is that they will actually take much larger sheets and print them on, and then they will actually cut out the image that is going to be their final pages. All of those things are an option for you. Again, probably not the most cost-efficient or effective way of doing it, but certainly would be a way of doing it nonetheless. So that would be doing back-to-back. The other issue that you run into this is that your paper weights start to get extremely heavy. Because again, you're putting two of these things together, you've just doubled the weight of your paper as a single piece of paper. So it's very, they tend to be pretty stiff. The next one that's down here that would be a possibility would be spiral binding. And I'm sure you guys know what spiral binding is. It's the things that looks like, it's usually a plastic rib that's just got a series of teeth that go through and you just whip through pages. You guys know what it is I'm talking about? You can get it done at Kinko's, you can get it done at Office Depot. It costs absolutely nothing to actually do them. And again, if your brand were actually running along those lines, that could actually be a really good go here for this. This next one should be one that everybody consider. Again, take a look at this guy right here. This is actually stapled or or a sewn pamphlet. So in this case, what they've done is they've taken single pieces of paper, and again, you can print on, if it's the right sort of paper, you can print on both sides. So they'll say, so anyway, let's just say this is going to be our book. You take the pages and you do not print them in order. These end up having to be printed out of order, and that will, again, you would actually lay out your book. You would probably do a mock layout of your book to figure out how to put this together, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say it's just going to be a 4-page booklet. So I'm going to take this page and I'm going to lay it inside this one. I'm going to fold this in half. And then I'm going to either staple or sew this binding edge right here. I would put staples through here, and I've actually got a book, right? The problem with this is that, though, there's this page number 1 right here. The other side of that page, when I print it out, is the back of my book. It's front cover and back cover, not 1, 2, 3 in a row. The same thing happens on this part right here. This is page 1 of my book. But what's right next to it is page 3, 4, 5. Does that make sense? So these have to be printed out of order, but they can be really effective, and they can be just as simple as a stapling of this, and that's all there is. So the advantage of these is that you can make them yourself. If it fits your brand, this is a great thing. But the other thing about this is that you could print out 20 of these, and instead of showing somebody your portfolio, you could actually give it to them. It not only functions as a portfolio, it functions as a promo piece for you. Huge. Something to consider. The next one over is the one that most people I know who do photography actually work with, and it's this guy right here. It's a post and screw, and I told you I was going to bring in a copy of my portfolio, and I didn't. Could somebody shoot me a quick email and say, hey, loser, bring your portfolio next time? But what screw and post is it basically starts out, it's a hardcover and on the other backside it's a hardcover, and they come apart, and the things that connects them is a screw and a post. So what ends up happening is that you have pages that have holes in it, just like this. You've got a hardcover that has a hole in it that allows you to put a screw through it, and it all screws through this. So you have hardcover, all of your pages, and a back cover, and a screw and a bolt go through these three things, and it holds the entire thing together. Does that make sense to everybody? And then you can take it apart to edit your book. So you pull the whole thing apart, you take pages in, you put pages out, whatever, and then you screw it all back together again, and it becomes your portfolio. Does that make sense, everyone? Again, if somebody please shoot me an email, I promise you I will bring mine in next week. The next one down is actually an example of Japanese or stab binding. This again would be a way of making your own portfolio. So it is literally a way to sew your portfolio together. There are instructions. If this sort of thing appeals to you, this sort of Japanese binding thing, if this appeals to you, there's a PDF on our website that will walk you through all the steps to actually do this sort of more decorative stitching part of it all. But this would clearly be another option that you should actually consider in all of this. However, it's not the only one. There are unconstructed portfolios. If you take a look at this portfolio right here, all it really is, it's a box that sort of has a cover on it, but it's holding a whole collection of loose material in this. That would be another option for you, because in this case, there's nothing that's really bound at all. It's really more of a glorified sort of container in here. Again, there's a huge number of resources that I've given you guys to do presentation boxes as well. So you could, and it's not going to show up in here as well, but especially for those who are doing fine art work, a lot of the people when they're showing fine art only want to show prints. And so what they will do is they will actually build literally a portfolio case. It's a really nice box that would again be driven by your brand, but it can be slip covered, or it can simply come over. Oh, the top opens up, and it's an extremely I will say this is a glorified print case box. So you can actually have loose prints that exist inside of it. The downside of that is that you don't get to establish any order. You also have people handling your prints. So, I mean, there's things that you all need to be considering in all of this. Does that sort of make sense? But again, I'm not ruling out any option in the world is an option that you guys are more than welcome to embrace. Again, it should be driven by your brand. The next thing down that we can talk about are softbound and hardbound books. In the case of a softbound book, the cover is actually paper. It's simply another something that's been printed out. How many people in this, has anybody in this room ever done a blurb book? Anybody ever done an Apple book? Anybody ever done a book? And how did you do it?
I don't remember the exact website, but it was like one of the similar blurb.
Yeah, so basically, did you do the little layout on your computer first, or did you just send them a bunch of pictures?
I think I used one of the pre-made templates. I haven't
Right.
done it since high school.
Okay.
So I didn't even know how to.
But how easy was it?
It was so easy.
It's ridiculously easy. So Blurb is probably the biggest player. How many people in here are working in Lightroom all the time, or a lot, or some? There is a dedicated connection to Blurb, so you can actually lay out a book together using the book module in Lightroom, and there's literally a button that will send it to Blurb, and they will print it out for you, bind it, and get it back to you. The downside to that is that you have no control over the color. The color is going to be whatever Blurb decides to give you. Now, you can include profiles, you can do all of that stuff, but you don't have the control of it that you would have if you print this stuff out yourself. There's better versions of that and worse versions of that, but that would certainly be an option for you. And again, whether you want to use softbound or hardbound will ultimately impact the price of that, but it would be another option for you guys to consider. When we talk about the spines of all of this, you can do a whole cornucopia of this. Most people think about books like you would this binder right here. Most people see this as the option for a book. In the case of this book right here, it has got a closed spine, which means you don't see anything on this spine. You don't see any of the pages. There are versions, though, that you can get. In most screw and post versions of this spine is open because you've only got a cover on the back and a cover on the front, and all the pages that you see that you've actually then bound together show through on that. There are ways that you can actually cover that part. There are people who actually do, if you do the bookbinding thing through another company, there are ones where you can actually arrange to have this left open. However, there are also versions in most cases, again, most people have portfolios like this that have the front of this is open. However, you can actually have these closed as well. And usually what happens with that is you have a flap that comes up over the front of this, and then it's got a closing mechanism so that somebody actually has to physically undo something, flip open the flap to open up your portfolio. Again, it becomes somewhat present-like. This is a version of this right here. You can see that's what one looks like that's actually got a closure in the front. This is an example, again, of a book that's actually, this is the front flap and the rear flap of this same book, and you can see all the pages in it. So those would all be options for you. This is another simply Japanese bound version of this, and you can see this is really the spine of the book that shows all of this together. These can be really beautiful things, so don't say, completely discount this out. You need to be considering all of these things in the book that you ultimately are going to put together. Last thing, a couple things in here that we should talk about really quickly are things to consider. You can do gatefolding books, is what these actually call these. When you think about a gatefolding book, what it ends up being is that instead of simply having a situation like this where a book opens up like this, you actually have pages that are connected on the opposite side of this that then open out like this. So you end up with a sort of a triptych page layout like this, and those can continue to go out. It is not limited to just 2 pages. So I've actually seen portfolios where people have done these incredibly long horizontal panoramas. And it's impressive when you actually start to unfold a panorama and it gets out to be that 6-8 panels long, and you're just going, oh my God, look at this. I mean, it's insane, but nonetheless, something to consider. This is embossing right here. What's the difference in embossing and debossing? It's the direction. If you emboss something, the type appears to be pressed into the surface you're looking at, so the back of the type is going away from you. If you deboss it, it's actually raised letters. It comes up at you. You can do this for not only the cover of your book. If it's in leather, you can also do it in paper. You can also do these. I would never print the emulation of this out. I don't think that would actually be a good one. I love doing things like this, and you guys should know that these are all possibilities for you. How many people in here know you can print on transparent media? So transparent media starts to alter, starts to begin to introduce a whole cornucopia. I did a promotional piece once that was done all with, it was supposed to be to really show my compositing work, and it was just transparent layer after transparent layer that built the composite together. Ended up being really, really, really beautiful. But you can see it's another sort of thing that they're sort of like pointing out here. Don't feel like you have to limit yourself to only doing, white pages in a bound book. You can actually mix this up and do some really extraordinary things. Something that you should actually consider in here. Again, make the experience of looking at a portfolio something that is somewhat interactive and somewhat surprising. I think these are credible. This is what I'm going to do next. So these are actually called flag books. They are, in this case, whatever you can see, they're sort of more like pieces that have been put together that actually allow you to, some of these are scored and cut, so that as you're actually going through the process of looking through this book, there's things that are realigning. This one down here, it's a sort of especially easy one to see. This was a book that was done of a series of portraits that are all pretty much shot at the same sort of like focus, vantage point, but then they're all sliced up. So as you start to go through this book, you can end up mixing eyes, different eyes with different noses and different mouths. You can sort of like go through that whole process. So it becomes something that, again, sort of takes on an experience of its own. It's not as planned out as simply going through just a conventional book. Anyway, I think this is a really clever idea. One of the most beautiful promo pieces, and I probably said this to some of you guys, that I ever saw in my life, somebody did this. It was actually the size of a conventional newspaper, and then they had folded it down to about this size right here. And when you got it, what ended up happening was that it looked like a conventional book, and again, it had the title on the top of it right here. And then when you opened this up like this, this was a full spread that existed right here. But then as you opened this up like this, this was also a full single image spread. Then when you went like this was also a single image spread. It was unreal. The expense of, the experience of then opening this up. So in this case, it was not even a book. It was a single piece of paper that had been scored and folded, but so brilliantly thought out, because as you're unfolding this stuff, there's stuff that is horizontal right now that then half of that just became vertical, half of that just flipped itself vertically, yet it all continued to work together, and it was just the experience of it was extraordinary. And so again, thinking about those sort of things, that was a perfect example of creativity triumphing money. So these are just some examples that you guys should consider in this. Again, this goes back to the, this is a screw and post version of this book. This is actually a metal hinge with a wooden face on it. This is what it looks like right here. This next one down here, I think I've already showed you guys once. This is a person who really wanted their, so what they ultimately ended up doing on this was a portfolio case. So I don't think I have a preliminary picture of this. No, I don't. So it was a case that actually opened up, and inside of it were some conventional portfolio pieces. So again, books that you actually pulled out that gave you that sort of same experience. But then nestled in the base of that was actually an iPad that had the electronic version of that book on it. And that's what this guy actually looked like. So again, it was actually leveraging all of those things. You can see that this is just, again, it was a clamshell book that actually opened up and actually contained all of that. The color of the fabric that's on the inside of this would come from your mood board and the color of your library. And so this is ultimately what the way it ended up being shown on this. Connected to, this has got to be a hard drive on here as well. So again, tricked out for a little space right there. You know that shit's not coming back from someplace. Yep, I sent that to, Leo Burnett. Never saw it again, at any rate. This is one that was actually made solid wood. Now, again, some of these I think are more successful than others. But you can see this is a solid wood piece, and you open it up in the portfolio. You can see there's a finger access that's right in here. It's mounted inside this giant block of wood. Hopefully this guy has something to do with wood. This would be a conventional portfolio that goes inside a slip case. That's what this guy is actually called. This is how mine are actually done, or sort of similar to that. Simply another version of this. Again, a slipcase version of this book. This is a completely bound book. Anytime I get a portfolio that's got that many pages in it, though, I've got to really begin to wonder. I had a friend here who did a portfolio once, and he decided to do a Hail Mary, and his Hail Mary was to print like 300 pictures. His portfolio was like 300 pages long. I mean, it was like meant to be. It was not even a coffee table book. It was bigger than that. And I was just like, wow, how did that work for you? And he goes, well, it separated me from the crowd. And I was like, yeah, this is what I asked. And he goes, it separated me from the crowd. Anyway, this is another example of post and screw. You can see these are this post and whatever. They simply go through the covers of the book and all the pages in there. So that's sort of an example of what that's like. And then again, these are just some versions of books that have actually been, these are softbound so that you can actually print image on the cover of your book and print image on the back of your book. So this was really just designed to give you guys, again, a few things to start thinking about, how you ultimately want your portfolio to be. And then finally in this is not redundant, but this is, again, just some resources that you guys have for us to actually look at. If you're deciding that you really want to do the conventional leather-bound 11x14 screw and post guy, this group right here, I take that back, not lost luggage. The two that you probably should consider, the number one I would consider because it's the least expensive of them all, and they still do beautiful work, would be House of Portfolios. Brewer Cantamello is the one that has been around. These people actually invented the entire whole genre of doing this kind of stuff, so you would be able to consider them. If you're interested in doing ones that are more sort of alternative material faces, so if you want to do acrylic, you want to do wood, you want to do metal, Lost Luggage are the people who are doing the biggest versions of this right now. So those would be places that I would suggest going. There's one more in here that you would consider if you really are looking to do this more as a kind of a do-it-yourselfer, and it's this guy, this group right here, this Pina Zangaro. These are the people, if you buy a portfolio, for instance, if you go everybody do this with me really quickly. Could you jump online really fast and just go to B&H Photo? And when you get to B&H Photo, do a search for PINA, P-I-N-A. I think that might take us to it. And you'll see that you get a whole, they are all about helping you build your own portfolios. So we will look at hinge strips later on and sort of what they are. But what I want you to do is come down here to the Pinot Zingaro 11x14 Pro Archive shelves. So these are protective sleeves. That's not what I'm looking for at all. Let me do that again. So in this case, if you start to go through here, guys, I'm not going to spend hours doing this, whatever, but go through here. They make portfolios. Again, I wouldn't get, they make actual portfolio covers, and they make relatively nice ones. But the other thing that these guys do is they have pre-scored and pre-drilled pages. So you'll see these are all screw and post. This is a missed thing. If you actually click on this, it'll show you what this actually looks like. Again, this is the screw and post version. It looks like this has sort of got a sort of like a frosted acrylic on it. You can see it costs $90. If we take a look from the side, this is what the side looks like. Yeah, they're not showing us a version that's open, which is unfortunate. Go to their website, you'll see it here. You'll also see that there are different website versions, different sizes of this that you can actually get as well. So this would be the screw and post. Again, you can see here, if we zoom in, this is what it ends up, a screw and post situation ends up looking like. It's right here. You can see there's screws that go through these pages. These are scored pages so that when they open up, they lay flat. They're pre-drilled as well. All of the double-sided papers that you can get for portfolios that are pre-drilled are all made by Moab, and it is all their LaSalle paper. So if you want to find it, you can actually go right here to this website, the Pinot Zingaro, whatever, their version of this paper. Again, they're who supplies the paper to everybody. Moab is the one who actually makes it. So if you want to see what that paper is actually like, you can actually just pick up some Moab, or you can pick up some of this paper for this stuff right here. But again, if we do a Moab, say what?
You got disconnected from the projector.
Oh, sorry about that. If you do another new page here, undo Moab paper. No, that's not to say that you have to use pre-drilled paper. I'm just trying to make this whole process as easy for you guys as I can. Moab used to do their Entrada, which was a pure rag, double-sided paper, a really beautiful matte paper. They don't do that anymore in the pre-drilled and scored version of it, which is sad. The one that they do is their, like I say, it's called their LaSalle paper. And you can see it's this one right here. It's a LaSalle photo. It is a resin paper. It's still got reasonably good quality to it. You can also pick up the double-sided sheets from Moab that are pre-scored and pre-drilled. But you'll see these all over the place. It is the only double-sided pre-scored, pre-drilled paper that I know of in existence. So if it's a paper that functions for you, that works for you, that you're happy with the results, then it's a great thing to use. It's a huge time saver if you're going to go the screw and post route. It's conceivable, if you guys want to check it out, that we could just all band together. There's 15 of us and we buy a pack of 25 and everybody can try out a couple of sheets of it. You guys could get together. So don't feel like it's just on you as far as that part goes. Does that sort of make sense? But just realize that any of them that you see are going to be the same. It looks like they have it in a semi-gloss and a matte surface to sort of give you some variation of it, but that's basically what it is. That's the paper that you're going to find. That's the one that the whole peanut that they ultimately make. So those would be the places that I would suggest. You're more than welcome. Again, there's a number of resources there for you guys to actually take a look around. So I would strongly suggest doing that part. Other than that, if there's specific resources that you're looking for and you can't find them, just let me know. For the editing and sequencing, we're not going to go through this right now. I am asking you guys to read this. It was a PowerPoint presentation. It goes relatively fast. It'll just put a couple of things in your mind. I mean, that is the extent of it right there. So I'm going to ask you to read that for next week so that we have something that we can deal with next week. Are we good on this part so far? Okay, so there's a couple of things that I want to get through right now about putting together for your, what I'm going to ask you guys to bring in next week. So to do that, I need you, if you've got all of your external, I'm going to plug in my hard drive. The 40 to 50 images that I ask you to bring, I need you to put them all together in a single folder, if you wouldn't mind, please. Do me a favor. Let's not do all of them. Do me a favor. Make a copy of 8 of them, okay? Because I want to show you a couple things that may fuck up your file. And if it fucks up your file, I don't want this. I don't want it to be, hey, Verser, that was my only copy of that file. That was my master file. That's the one image that my mother gave me right before she died, and the only thing that's meant anything to me in my life. And you just had me resize that in such a way that I can no longer use it. I'm going to hunt you down, find you, and shoot you like the dog you are. No, you're not. You're not going to do that. You're going to kill all my plants. I know it. You're going to find your way into my house, and you're going to round up all of my friends. All right, because we're going to do a couple things here. I want to try to make this a little bit easier for you guys. So we're going to try a couple things here. I'm going to do this inside of what I call my toss folder. I need you to simply make a blank folder, and I'm going to call this portfolio or resize. And say OK to that. And then I'm going to grab, like I said, 8 of my images. And copy them. Don't move them. Copy them into that thing that says Portfolio Resize. In my case, I'm working with full res images, so they're the big boys. In your case, if you've already resized these, if you've already got really small ones, that's fine. But I'm actually working with master copies. These are layered Photoshop files. They're all pretty big. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so has everybody got that going? Are we good? All right, tell me when. While you're in that folder, I want you to make a second folder in there. So this is now going to be a folder inside my Portfolio Resize. I'm going to do a new one here, and I'm going to call this Smaller Versions. Are we good on this part? And then I just want you to open up one of them. So simply double click on one of them because we need to go into Photoshop. Again, if you get lost in this whole process, I'm recording this video right now. Simply watch the video. You can get back to this. So the first thing that I'm going to do on this is that I'm actually going to record an action of this. I want to repeat this same process on a ton of files, so I'm going to turn this into an action. So to turn this into an action, you need to find your actions palette. If you do not see a thing that says action, you want to come up to the window menu and come down to Actions, and it'll actually show. For me, I've actually got it showing all the time. For you, if you don't have it showing, it should pop up somewhere next to it. This just simplifies it. If you can't remember this, or you don't want to use Actions, or you don't want to do this, you don't have to. But if you need to flatten and resize 1,000 images, this just makes it easier to do. Sort of makes sense? Okay, so I take that back. Actually, I may be able to do this in a different way. I'm going to try this in a different way so you don't have to use Actions. If not, we'll go back to Actions. Let me check this out really quickly, though. Yeah, we're going to do this a different way, guys. We're going to do this a different way. Instead, don't worry about your action palette. Instead, come up to your File menu, come down to Scripts, and come down to Image Processor. And it will actually open up a folder for you. And in the very top, you need to select the images that you're going to process. So those 8 images I ask you to copy, I'm actually going to ask you to use to select that folder. So we're going to click on Select Folder. So I'm simply clicking on Select Folder, and then I'm going to re-navigate to the thing for mine that was called Portfolio Resize, and I'm going to go ahead and say Open that. So that's telling them where the sources are. I am not going to include the subfolders because that's actually where I want to put the ones that I ultimately do resize into. So then it's going to say select the location to save your processed images. In this case, I'm going to again click on Select Folder, and I'm going to pick that folder that I just said that was inside the one that I wanted that was called Smaller Versions. So, is everybody good on this part? Is anybody doing this with me, or is it just watching? All right. So, in the file type, we are going to click that you do want to save this as a JPEG. Again, when we save this as a JPEG, you don't need to worry about layers anymore. Why not? It will flatten it. Why? Because a JPEG can't contain layers. So it has to flatten it, or it can't save it as a JPEG. In my case, I'm also going to check this box to convert this to sRGB, simply because this would be something I would do. You don't have to do it for the printout, so we're going to do. You can do it, but you don't have to. But this would certainly be, if I was going to do this for web, I would definitely want to convert this to sRGB. If you want to resize them, and I actually do want to resize these guys, so I'm going to click on this resize part right here. And this is going to give me a width and height part to do this, and I'm not really sure I want that. I'm going to see what happens if it lets me just leave the width of this blank. It's not going to let me do that, so I am not going to resize these images. And the reason I'm not going to resize them is that it will distort your image. If you only resize, if they were all verticals, that would be one thing. If they were all horizontals, that would be another thing. But in this case, I'm simply going to leave it like that and not worry about this part. I'm looking down here. I'm not going to do anything else on here. Everything seems to be good on this, so then I'm simply going to click on Run. And it should go through all of your images. And because I set mine up to yell at me when it's done, it's now done. And I'm going to come down and take a look at that folder. And now you can see inside that folder, there's another folder saying JPEGs, and inside that JPEG are all these images. And now you can see, having all of these images in there, you can see how small they are relative. This is the very first, this is now a 6.3 megabyte image compared to the one it was made from, which is an 88.7 megabyte image. So all the work that we're going to do now is going to go that much faster. So did it make the small version for all of you guys? Are we good on that part? Who didn't that work for? All right. So then that's the first step we're going to make. Say what? It made your images bigger in size?
In megabytes. One that was
How big were they to begin with?
they were JPEGs.
Oh, Well, then never mind. If you already had small JPEGs, you already had small JPEGs. Sorry. No, you're absolutely right. I should have mentioned that. If you already got small JPEGs, throw away the ones you just made then. We're not going to use the big ones. We'll just do this very same next step on the little ones. I'm just trying to get everybody to have small files to work with. Does that sort of make sense, everyone? Are we good on this? So if you already had small files to begin with, great, use those. If you didn't, like me, I'm much happier to be working with this right now. Are we good on this part? Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is actually the contact sheet. So go back into Photoshop, come up to the File menu, come down to Script again, and I take that back, come down to Automate this time, and come down to Contact Sheet 2. So this is, everybody see where I'm at? File menu, Automate, Contact Sheet number 2, and say OK to that. And it'll bring up a window again that allows you to actually automate this process. And this one's actually really good. This is how I make all of my stuff because I don't want to put all this stuff together and resize everything. So to use this one, again, in the source images right here, you want to choose the folder and navigate to the folder that you want to use. So in my case, again, it was in my TOS folder, Portfolio Resize. It is the smaller versions. It is that JPEG folder. This is where all the source of my images that I want to use. So then I'm going to simply say open to that. So this is exactly what I want to do. Again, I don't have any subfolders inside of that, so I don't need to include that part. But in the document that I'm going to make, I want you to change this to, I want your document size to be 8 by 10, so 8 inches. Again, use your drop-down menu to pick inches. And use 8 inches wide, 10 inches tall. Go ahead and set your resolution at 300 pixels per inch. In terms of the color profile right here, you can leave it as this, although if you used my method or you're using JPEG, I actually changed mine to sRGB, so that's what they all are, so I'm going to leave it in that. Again, if it had layers in it, this would flatten all the layers, but again, I'm using the smaller JPEG versions. You do want to leave the mode as RGB color, and the 8-bit depth is exactly what you would want on this guy. However, the part that we care about the most is this right down here. In terms of the thumbnails, what you want to do is in terms of place, you want to do a cross for the first. In this case, it doesn't really matter because they're going to be identical. You do want to enable use auto spacing, and you want 2 columns by 2 rows. And you also want to enable rotate for best fit. This will give you the biggest images that you can possibly get for this piece of paper. And then finally, you can actually use this to imprint file names. So if you've got a lot of images that are maybe similar to one another, and you're not sure whether this one is version 3 or version 4 or whatever, these will actually label your images. So I actually like this part. So I do enable the file name as caption. And once you get all of this put together, simply say, OK. And now you'll see why I wanted to get my files smaller, because this, using gigantic files, I did this once. I had 75 files that I was trying to do it with, and I simply ran it on all my master copies. I could have had dinner before it ended. And so you can see, in my case, mine's finished. And you can see that I have now got multiple contact sheets. In this case, I've got 2 because you picked 2 images because you're only doing those 8 by 10s. You can actually save these contact sheets now. It's called Contact Sheet 1, Contact Sheet 2. You can rebuild these if you want to do this again sometime when you're connected to a printer, or simply go up and save these guys. So I'll do a save as, and I'll call this Contact Sheet number 1, and I'm going to put it again with the files that just made it, and I'll save that guy. And then you can do the same thing. You can save 2. It's just so that you have them if you want to build these, and so you don't have to print them right away, but eventually I am going to print them, and I'm going to call that Contact Sheet number 2. And then these are what you print out. Does this make sense? And then you cut them up so that we can actually lay them out. So this will give you something that's reasonably good in size. It's not prohibitively expensive to actually print out, and this will give us, so it's big enough to actually be able to see it. It's big enough to have an opinion about the image itself. It may not be everything. Again, you're going to, if you've got something that's really, really, really super subtle about your imagery, whatever, that may not be revealed in this. Liz, I was thinking about some of the compositing stuff you did where you were introducing elements that you really had to have a relatively large, good quality print to experience that part. You know that about them, so they still are viable candidates for us. Now, we looking at these small thumbnails may not understand that part. You can expand on that story if it becomes an issue when we're actually doing the editing and sequencing part. Okay? Are there questions about this, guys? Are we good on this part? Okay, so this is then what you would print out, and you will be good to go for next week. Is everybody good on that? Okay. Now, some of you guys have been with me before. Some of you guys have been in other of my classes before. But the last couple things that I want to touch on right here really quickly would be what I call file prep and printing. And so the first thing that we need to start with here is an entire color managed workflow. How many people in this room are using a disciplined color managed workflow? Raise your hand up high. You should be proud. So we need to address the rest of you guys who are not, because you're never going to be able to print out portfolio quality work until you do that. Because aren't all of you looking at your screens making judgments about your color and your contrast and your tone, and you're doing all of those judgments, but you are not doing it in a calibrated fashion? That's a nightmare. It's a train wreck. You can't do that. So I'm going to quit out of this, and I am going to go through, that is what we're going to do in the last part right here. I need to get all of you jump started to a really quick color managed workflow. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you really quickly what the goal in all of this is. Again, for those of you who have been through this and who are already doing this, I apologize for the repeat and all of this, but this is critical to your classmates. So we've got to do it, and this seems like a good place to do it as any. So this is what I'm looking for right here. So I'm going to explain this really quickly. I don't end up with a cursor whenever I pull these things open. So you'll hear the audio on this. You won't see me pointing to anything. But this is basically the issue that we've got. Sadly, we don't have time in this class to actually get into profiling and calibrating the input part of all of this. If there's anybody who is wondering about what this means really, this is outside the purview of this class. I'll be happy to meet with you at some other time and get you through this part if you really want to. So this basically boils down to profiling the sensor of your cameras. That's what this is really all about. Because this whole process should start at that stage of the game. But from what I understand, all of you guys already have stuff right now you're considering, so this has sort of been taken out of the equation. What matters to us is this part right here. The monitor, so this is Adobe Photoshop, so this is your image in Photoshop. What we have to do is we have got to actually eliminate the device bias that all of these things have. All of you guys know that no matter how many monitors exist in the world, they all have a slightly different interpretation of color. That's what we call color bias or device dependence. Does that make sense, everyone? So if you look at a wall of TVs at the Best Buy and they're showing the same picture, all of them look slightly different because they all have a unique color bias to them. We can eliminate that color bias, and so I'll make all of those screens look correct and actually give you the true, honest version of what your file should look like. Does that make sense? And then the same thing when we go to print out. Every single printer and every single paper combination also is device dependent and also has a bias. And we need to eliminate those as well. So if I can eliminate all the monitor bias and I can eliminate all the printer bias, I'm good to go. Then what I have on my monitor will be what I get on my printer. So for those of you not working in a color managed workflow, are your prints looking like your monitor? Sometimes, but not really. So basically my guess is that you do a print and you look at it and you make a judgment about it and you say it's a little too red or it's a little too green or it's a little too contrasty or it's a little too warm or cool or whatever, and then you go and you make an adjustment and you do another print, right? And that keeps going on and on and on until you get something that you like, right? I haven't done a test print in 15 years, at least. The most prints I ever do to get to a final, I'll do one, and occasionally I'll spot something in the print that I didn't spot on screen, but if I go back and look on screen, it's there, and I just say, oh, well, you were just being too lazy, or you were rushing this, or you didn't. So just pointing it out, but they are that close to one another, and that's what I want you guys to actually, that's the point that I want you guys to be. I don't want you wasting your time printing this shit. Especially when it starts to get to be nice paper and you're doing that. Print after print on a piece of paper that costs $4 is a nightmare. So here's the goal. This is how this whole thing is going to work. And it goes through both of the printer profiling and the monitor work in a very same fashion. So I'm just going to show this to you really quickly. Basically, this is the process of what happens. So I've got a file right here. And it's got a single pixel on it that's got a red color in it. And the red is a 240, and the green is a 60, and the blue is 110. All right, so that's a single color on my image that my file is asking for. Does that make sense, everyone? I've got a monitor. Fucker. I've got a monitor now here, so that's my file. The monitor actually, when I go to view this on my monitor, it's actually giving me a red of 245, a green of 10, and a blue of 160. Does that make sense? My monitor doesn't look a thing like my file because my monitor has a bias in it. It's showing me, it's lying to me. It's not giving me the color that I want. So if I calibrate my monitor and I profile my monitor, I'm building a profile that creates a table to deal with this bias, with this discrepancy. So my profile knows that when the file's asking for that 240, it knows that the monitor is showing me 245, so it actually, the profile subtracts 5R. Does that make sense? And then it knows when I'm asking for a green of 60 that it's giving me a green of 10, so it knows that it actually has to add a plus 50 green. And then finally down here, it knows that when it's asking for this blue of 110 that I'm getting a 160, so it needs to subtract 50 blue. Does this make sense to everyone so far? So that in the end, my monitor plus profile, I see a red of 245, a green of 60, and a blue of 110. And so this equals this. Every monitor is going to have its own profile because everyone's different. But if you profile them all, calibrate them all, you end up with all of them looking identical, and you can trust your monitor to be making the judgments you want it to make. That's what we're going to build, is that middle part right there, that monitor profile. So to do that, you check one of these out from the Media Center. This is an I1 profiler. The Media Center has two versions of this. This is the better of the versions. They're both made by the same company. There's an I1 profiler, and then there's a Color Monkey. Don't use the Color Monkey. It's a piece of garbage. This I1 profiler, though, is brilliant, and they're all brand new. They just bought a whole new set of these. So these are the ones that you want to use. They will, so you can check them out at the Media Center. You can take them home. It doesn't take long to do this. You can actually do this at the Media Center and turn it and give it right back in. It comes with a thumb drive that's got a software on it, and you load the software onto your computer. So what's going to happen is that the software is going to actually start to kick out color for me, and this puck, this is a hardware puck, is going to measure the color, and it's going to find the discrepancy between color that's been asked for and what my monitor's showing me. And that's how it builds that profile. Does that make sense to everyone? So to use this guy, my suggestion, again, check it out from the Media Center. You want to plug this in first. Because the software is going to look for something, and if it doesn't find it, if it doesn't see it, it gets confused and it gets angry. So let me eject my hard drive first. And plug this guy in. So the software that you use in this, it's called I1 Profiler. Again, it's made by X-Rite. It's sitting right here. Double click on I1. It opens up. Now this software is designed to profile many things. It can profile not only monitors, but it can profile, projectors. It can profile a number of things. It was not happy that that projector got kicked out in the middle of loading. And it's still unhappy about that.